What if the story you know about one of the world's most controversial plants is only its final, shortest chapter? Tonight, we're not focusing on the modern noise, but on the ancient, quiet whispers from our distant past. We're traveling back thousands of years to the windswept steppes of Central Asia to find the origins of a plant that would eventually circle the globe. It's a story of ritual, of utility, and of a deep, forgotten connection. If you enjoy these journeys into the past, I'd be so grateful if you'd click the like button or subscribe to the channel. And I'm always so curious to know where our community is listening from. Please feel free to share in the comments what time it is and where in the world you're settling in from. For now, find a comfortable spot, let your mind drift, and get ready for our story. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep tonight. We begin our journey at the very dawn of humanity's relationship with cannabis. Long before it had a name we'd recognize, in the place where it all began. Our story starts not with a human act, but with the land itself. We are in Central Asia, on the vast high-altitude expanse of the eastern Tibetan Plateau. This is a place of extremes. A place where the sky feels impossibly large and the earth stretches out in every direction. Here, in the shadow of the colossal Altai and Tian Shan mountains, a single plant species evolved. The distant, snow-capped peaks of the Altai stand as silent, massive landmarks, watching over a land of rolling grasslands. The sound that defines this place is the biting, constant wind. It sweeps across the plains, a relentless, rushing whisper that carries the scent of the earth. This plant, the ancestor of all cannabis, is ancient, far older than we are. Genetic studies suggest that its lineage diverged from its closest relative, the common hops plant, around 28 million years ago. For millions upon millions of years, it grew wild. A simple green wildling of the steppes. It was a survivor. It co-evolved alongside the great grazing megafauna of the Pleistocene. Herds of woolly mammoths and vast migrations of deer would have moved through these valleys, and they may have eaten this plant, carrying its seeds for miles and dispersing them across the high plains. The plant was just one part of a vast, complex ecosystem, thriving long before the first human footsteps ever marked this land. The first humans to arrive were Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. They lived in small nomadic bands, following the herds, learning the secrets of the land through seasons of trial and error. Their world was immediate and sensory. As they walked, their feet would have crushed the wild herbs growing underfoot. The air would carry the sharp, clean scents of thyme and sage, and mixed among them another distinct aroma, a pungent, herbal, almost spicy smell. They would have found the plant growing wild, perhaps in a sheltered ravine near a small stream, a cluster of tall green stalks reaching for the sun. For these early people, the plant was not one thing, but many. It offered two distinct and powerful resources, a duality that would define its future. This was a plant of two faces. From its stalk came long, durable fibers. From its female flowers came sticky, psychoactive resins. And even beyond these, its very seeds were a dense source of nutrition. If you were to crack one open, you would find a rich source of protein and fatty acids. They would have had a gritty, nutty taste, a reliable, storable food source in a harsh and unpredictable world. These early humans would have gathered these seeds, eaten them raw, or perhaps parched them over a fire. For thousands of years, this was the relationship, a simple, opportunistic use of a wild resource. But slowly, something changed. Humans are not just gatherers. We are selectors. We are gardeners. True cultivation, the act of domestication, likely began as people started to notice the differences between the plants. Perhaps one person found a plant whose stalk fibers were unusually long and strong. They saved the seeds from that asterisk plant. They sowed them in a protected patch. Over generations, this selection created a new breed, hemp, a plant bred for its fiber, its utility. At the same time, perhaps in a different valley, a shaman or healer noticed that the resins from another plant, when burned, produced a unique, fragrant smoke, a smoke that seemed to quiet the mind or open a door to the spiritual world. They saved the seeds from that asterisk plant. This selection created the drug-type varieties, bred not for their stalks, but for their potent, resinous flowers. This great split between industrial hemp and psychoactive cannabis happened thousands of years ago, right here in the heart of Asia. The plant's journey, however, was just beginning. It would not stay in its mountain cradle. The steppe hypothesis connects the spread of hemp directly to the great migrations of the steppe peoples. Groups like the Yamnaya, nomadic pastoralists, who were among the first to master the horse, began to move. They moved west, towards Europe. They moved east, towards Siberia and China, and they carried the seeds of this useful plant with them. We must be clear about this early use. The idea of smoking the plant in pipes, as we know it today, did not exist. The earliest use of its psychoactive properties was likely through ingestion, or far more commonly, by burning the whole plant or its flowering tops as a ritual incense. Imagine a small yurt on the cold steppe, a fire burning in the center. A shaman throws a handful of the dried flowers onto the hot coals. The tent fills with a thick, aromatic smoke. This was not recreational. This was sacred, and we know it spread early. Some of the earliest archaeological evidence for the plant's use comes not from its heartland, but from the Yangshao culture in China. Around 5,000 years BCE, remnants of hemp fibers were found, impressed into pottery. This suggests that the knowledge of hemp, the plant's practical face, had already traveled far, becoming a cornerstone of early textile production. From this wild heartland, the plant didn't stay put. It began a journey, carried by one of the most formidable cultures of the ancient world. This journey of the plant's history takes us to a different part of the Altai Mountains, and to a people known as the Pazyryk. The Pazyryk culture were a nomadic Iron Age people, related to the Scythians. They flourished between the 6th and 3rd centuries BCE. They were horse warriors, masters of the high, cold plains, and like many ancient cultures, they poured immense resources into honoring their dead. They buried their elite, their chieftains and priestesses, in elaborate log tombs. These tombs were then covered by massive mounds of stone, monuments known as kurgans. For thousands of years, these kurgans kept their secrets. Then, in the 1940s, the Soviet archaeologist Sergei Rudenko began excavating them. He discovered something miraculous. A unique quirk of the climate in this specific region had worked an incredible magic. Water had seeped into the deep tombs, and then, in the deep, cold winters, it froze, and it never thawed. The kurgans had become time capsules, encased in permafrost. When Rudenko and his team chipped through the ice, they were not met with dust and bone. They found organic materials, preserved for 2,500 years. They found intricate felt tapestries, wooden furniture, and clothing. they found the bodies of the Paziric nobles themselves, mummified by the ice, and their skin was covered in the most intricate dark blue tattoos depicting stylized animals, griffins, and stags. It was a stunning window into a lost world. One of the most famous burials is the Ice Maiden, also known as the Ukoka Princess. She was a woman of high status, buried with 6 horses and a feast to accompany her into the afterlife. And with her, archaeologists found a small container. Inside, it was cannabis. This was a clue. But in other tombs, the evidence was even more direct and dramatic. Rudenko unearthed tall, tripod-like structures made of bronze. They were braziers, or censers. Inside the cups of these braziers, his team found scorched stones, and mixed with the stones, they found a significant quantity of cannabis fruits and seeds. But this was only half the puzzle. Alongside these braziers, they also found the frames of small, tent-like structures made of sticks and covered in leather or felt. One was a small, hexagonal felt tent, just large enough for a few people to huddle inside. The team stood at the edge of the excavated kurgan, the sharp, biting cold of the air stinging their faces. The smell of damp earth and ancient, frozen leather filled the air. And from the cannabis residue, still potent after millennia, came a faint, lingering, spicy scent. They pieced the scene together. The ritual became clear. This was a funeral, right? After the noble was interred, the Paziric would erect this small, tight tent. Inside, they would place the bronze brazier and heat the stones until they were red hot. Then, huddled inside the tent, they would throw the cannabis onto the scorching stones. The tent would instantly fill with a thick, aromatic, and intensely psychoactive smoke. This was not a casual act. This was a profound ritual. It was likely a form of purification for the living, or perhaps a shamanistic journey, a way to guide the soul of the deceased on its path to the other world. It was an act of reverence, shrouded in mystery and smoke. This incredible discovery wasn't just a local curiosity. It was the physical, frozen proof of a story told by a famous historian, hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years earlier. A story that, for centuries, no one had fully believed. That historian was Herodotus, known as the father of history. Herodotus was a Greek writer from the 5th century BCE. He was an insatiable traveler and a collector of stories. His most famous work, The Histories, was a sprawling, ambitious account of the cultures, conflicts, and wonders of the known world, centered on the great clash between the Greeks and the Persian Empire. He did not just write about his own people. He wrote with great, and often critical, fascination about the barbarian cultures at the edges of his world. Among these peoples, he wrote extensively about the Scythians. The Scythians were a vast and powerful confederation of nomadic warrior peoples. They were the undisputed masters of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the endless grasslands that stretch from the Black Sea towards Central Asia in what is now modern Ukraine and southern Russia. They were relatives of the Paziric people, and they shared many of the same customs. In his histories, Herodotus describes a peculiar ritual that the Scythians performed after a funeral. He presents it as a form of ritual purification, and his description is astonishingly precise. He wrote that the Scythians would build small, 3-poled tents. They would cover them with thick woolen felts, stretching them and pulling them as tight as possible to make them airtight. Does this sound familiar? Inside this tiny tent, Herodotus wrote, they would place a dish or a brazier filled with red-hot stones. So far, His account perfectly matches the archaeological finds in the Pazyryk kurgans. But then comes the crucial detail. He says they would take the seed of this hemp and throw it onto the hot stones. Modern scholars believe he was not referring to the literal seeds, which produce little smoke, but to the whole flowering tops of the plant, rich in resin. Herodotus then describes what happens next. He states that the burning cannabis produced a vapor, a smoke so thick and potent that no Grecian vapor bath can exceed. He, a Greek, was comparing it to the steam baths his own people enjoyed, and found the Scythian version far more powerful. And then he gives us the famous line. He wrote that the Scythians, transported by the vapor, shout for joy. For 2,000 years, this passage was often dismissed. Scholars and historians read this and smiled. They considered it a fantastical traveler's tale, a wild exaggeration told to a gullible Greek historian. They simply could not believe it. Then, in the 20th century, Sergei Rudenko opened the frozen tombs of the Pazyryk, and there, preserved in the ice, was the exact equipment Herodotus had described. The small felt tents, the bronze braziers, the scorched stones, the cannabis. We can almost picture the scene Herodotus was describing, a scene now vindicated by archaeology. The funeral is over. The great chieftain is buried. His warriors gather. They huddle inside the thick felt tent. The stones glow orange. The cannabis is thrown on. The tent fills with smoke, the acrid smell of burning felt mixing with the powerful, sweet, herbal scent of the vapor. The heat inside becomes intense, humid, and from within, muffled by the thick felt, comes the sound of men shouting, singing, and transported by the experience. We can also imagine Herodotus himself, perhaps in a bustling Greek marketplace on the Black Sea coast. He is sitting with a Scythian trader or traveler, his pen and notebook in hand. He listens intently, scribbling down the details of this strange, faraway ritual dedicated to capturing the story, unaware that his words would one day be proven, quite literally, frozen in time. This practice wasn't just for funerals. The Scythians were warriors, and they were nomads. Their entire culture was in motion, and as they moved, they carried this plant and its seeds with them. The Scythian world was vast, stretching from the shores of the Black Sea, bordering the Greek colonies, all the way east to the Altai Mountains, where they brushed against the cultures of China. Their lifestyle was defined by the horse. They were constantly moving, trading, raiding, and conquering. And in this fluid, dynamic world, plants traveled just as people did. Archaeology again gives us a personal, intimate look at this connection. Graves of Scythian warriors, men and women, often contain a small leather pouch. This pouch was a personal kit holding essential items for life and the afterlife. And frequently, alongside a flint or a personal trinket, these pouches have been found to contain a handful of cannabis seeds. We can feel the texture of that small, rough-spun hemp pouch, a vital possession for a warrior on the move. As these horse-riding nomads pounded the dry earth of the steppe, they became the primary vector for spreading this plant. They were the warriors who spread the seed. Their wagon trains, the rolling homes of the nomadic families, were piled high with felts, goods, and these ubiquitous leather pouches. The air of their camps would have smelled of horse sweat, worn leather, and the wood smoke from 100 campfires. Their influence radiated outwards. The Thracians and the Dacians, formidable ancient peoples who lived in the Balkans, in modern-day Romania and Bulgaria, learned of cannabis from their Scythian neighbors. Other classical writers noted that they used it to make garments and also understood its intoxicating properties. The plant moved west. In Germany, far from the steppes, cannabis seeds have been found in significant Iron Age burials. The Hochdorf chieftain's grave, a spectacular burial from around 550 BCE, contained cannabis, placed there as a grave good. This was not a plant that grew there naturally. It had been carried, traded, and valued, finding its way along the river routes and trade paths that the Scythians and their clients controlled. It also moved south into the heart of the cradle of civilization in the Middle East. Another steppe people, the Cimmerians, who predated the Scythians in their dominance, may have been the first to bring the plant to the attention of the Assyrian Empire. In Assyrian texts from the 7th century BCE, we find a new word, a substance called kubu or kunabu. Linguists and historians are fascinated by this word. It is a clear and direct cognate for our modern word, cannabis. The name itself traveled the Assyrians, meticulous record keepers, listed what kubu was used for. It was listed as a source of fiber for making rope and cloth. It was a source of oil pressed from its seeds, and it was used as an aromatic, a drug of sorrow, burned as incense in rituals. This threefold use, fiber, food, and incense, is the classic signature of the plant's ancient identity. From Assyria, it passed to their neighbors, the Persians, who would build a massive empire and who frequently fought the Scythians on their northern border, also adopted the plant. It would eventually find a place in their religion, Zoroastrianism, but not all of this spread was intentional. Some of it was purely accidental. These nomadic cultures traveled with vast herds of horses. Hemp seed is an excellent source of protein and fat, a perfect, energy-dense food for their prized animals. As these warriors and herders traveled, carrying sacks of hemp seed for their horses, and carrying their own personal pouches, seeds were inevitably dropped. Imagine a Scythian warrior stopping by a stream. A single hemp seed drops from his pouch into the dust, unseen. A wagon train rumbles along a trade route, leaking a small trail of seeds from a feed bag. In the spring, those seeds would sprout. A wild patch of cannabis would grow hundreds of miles from its origin. The plant was literally following the footsteps of humanity, establishing itself along the new highways of migration and trade. As this ancient plant began its journey, it split into countless different stories and uses. Our history is full of these fascinating details. If there's another ancient plant, material, or forgotten piece of history you'd love for us to explore in a future story, please let me know in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading your ideas. For now, our story follows the plant on its other great journey, this time eastward. As the Scythian warriors carried their ritual plant west, another, quieter journey was already well underway. This second great migration of cannabis was not one of conquest, but of cultivation and philosophy. We turn our gaze eastward to the ancient heartland of China, where the plant had been known for thousands of years. Here, it took on two entirely new identities. It became a profound medicine in the hands of legendary doctors, and it became a vital industrial fiber that would literally change the course of human communication. The pace of our story slows now, becoming more deliberate as we explore a history not of dramatic ritual, but of practical genius and deep scholarly thought. Our journey begins in a time of myth, at the very dawn of Chinese civilization. We travel to a quiet, misty mountain slope, shrouded in clouds. Here, according to legend, lived a figure who was more than a man. He was a cultural hero, an emperor from a forgotten age, perhaps around 2800 years BCE. His name was Shennong, which means the divine farmer. Shennong is the great father of Chinese agriculture. He is the one credited with teaching his people how to move from hunting and gathering to a life of stability. He is said to have invented the plow, the hoe, and to have discovered and taught the cultivation of the 5 grains, the staple crops that would feed a nation. But Shennong was also the father of Chinese medicine. His most famous legend is an act of profound self-sacrifice. To understand the world of plants, to separate the nourishing from the poisonous, and the healing from the mundane, he undertook a great quest. He is said to have tasted hundreds of herbs himself, meticulously noting the effect of each one on his own body. We can imagine this wise, robed figure walking the misty hills, carefully observing a flower, a root, or a leaf. He plucks a single leaf from a tall green plant, places it in his mouth, and thoughtfully, carefully, records its properties. This vast accumulated knowledge was, for millennia, passed down as an oral tradition. It was finally compiled and written down much later, in the 1st or 2nd century CE, during the Han Dynasty. The text was called the Shennong Ben-Cao Jing, which translates to the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica. This book is the foundational text of Chinese herbalism, a collection of all the knowledge attributed to the great hero. And looking at a copy of this ancient text, perhaps written on slips of bamboo, carefully tied together with string, we find one of the world's first written records of cannabis as a medicine. The Chinese character for cannabis is ma. It is one of the oldest recorded characters in the language, and it is a pictograph, a small picture that tells a story. The character shows the symbol for plants, hanging under the symbol for a shed or a lean-to. From the very beginning, this was a plant that was harvested, brought indoors, and hung to dry. We can almost hear the quiet sound of a scholar's brush as it paints this complex character onto a bamboo strip, capturing a central fact of domestic life. In the Shennong Ben-Cao Jing, the plant's properties are described with the careful, balanced language of Chinese medicine. It is described as acrid and balanced. This meant it was not considered hot or cold in its essential nature, but existed in a state of equilibrium, making it a versatile tool for restoring the body's own balance. The text, recording these ancient traditions, notes that the mafen, or the female flowers, were used to treat a remarkable range of ailments. It was prescribed for what the text calls female weakness, which may have referred to menstrual disorders, or to aid in recovery from childbirth. It was used for gout and rheumatism, suggesting that these ancient doctors recognized its powerful anti-inflammatory properties to soothe aching joints. It was listed as a treatment for malaria, beriberi, and perhaps most recognizably, for constipation, a likely reference to the use of its fiber-rich seeds. It was even prescribed for absent-mindedness, suggesting it was used in small, careful doses as a tonic for the mind or a balm for the spirit. But the Ben-Cao Jing is a work of profound observation. It is not a book of universal praise. Alongside these therapeutic benefits, the Divine Farmer includes a critical warning. The text states that consuming too much of the mafen can make one see ghosts and behave in a frantic-like manner. This is a clear, unambiguous acknowledgement of the plant's powerful psychoactive properties. This early, balanced view is remarkable. Thousands of years ago, these doctors saw the plant not as a vice, nor as a cure-all, but as a powerful substance to be treated with caution and respect. It was a medicine, and like any potent medicine, the dose was everything. It could heal, or it could delude. This mythical origin, this deep and nuanced understanding, solidified the plant's place in the Chinese apothecary, and it would lead directly to its use by one of the most brilliant and, in many ways, mysterious doctors in Chinese history. We move forward in time, from the realm of pure myth to the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century CE. This is a period of great upheaval, the era that would lead to the famed Three Kingdoms. And in this time of conflict, there lived a physician named Hua Tu. Unlike the mythical Shenang, Hua Tu was a real historical figure. Though the stories of his skill are so incredible, they have become the stuff of legend. He was revered as a Xinyi, a divine doctor. Hua Tu was not just an herbalist, he was a surgeon, and he is credited with performing procedures that were utterly unheard of in his time, and which would not be seen in the Western world for well over 1,000 years. Ancient texts claim he performed complex abdominal surgeries or laparotomies, healing ailments deep within the body. To do this, he needed something that no other doctor of his age possessed. He needed a true general anesthetic. He had one. The historical records give it a name. It was called mafizin, which translates to cannabis boiling powder. This was Hua Tu's secret formula. We can imagine his assistants in a quiet, focused room, using a mortar and pestle to grind dried cannabis flowers and other herbs into a fine powder. This powder was then mixed with wine and given to the patient to drink. The exact recipe for mofussin is one of the great lost secrets of medical history. The historical records tell us that Hua Tu, having run afoul of the powerful and suspicious warlord Cao Cao, was imprisoned and sentenced to death. Before his execution, he allegedly tried to pass on his medical manuscripts, but in his despair, he ultimately destroyed them, and with them, the precise formula for his anesthetic was lost to history. Historians and pharmacologists have long speculated about its ingredients. It was almost certainly not just cannabis. It was a complex and powerful compound. Hua Tu, a master pharmacist, likely combined the potent resin of cannabis with other powerful herbs, such as datura, which contains scopolamine, or even the highly toxic aconite. He was, in effect, balancing these powerful substances, creating a potion that could induce a state of complete unconsciousness without ending the patient's life. The effect is described in the records of the Three Kingdoms, a 3rd century text. It says, "If the malady were internal, he bade the patient swallow the anesthetic, and forthwith he became as if dead drunk. In this state, as if dead, the patient would be lying on a mat, breathing slowly and peacefully, completely unaware of the world." Then the text continues, "Who would make his incisions, cut away the problem, and the patient felt no pain." We can almost see the scene, the sharp, sweet, herbal smell of the mafizin wine being poured into a small clay cup, the quiet, focused atmosphere of the room, smelling of wine and herbs, the glint of Hua Tu's surgical knives, perhaps sterilized in that same wine or in a flame. This was not a ritual. This was a clinical procedure, an act of medical genius centuries ahead of its time. One of the most famous, though likely embellished, stories about Hua Tu involves the great general Guan Yu. The general had been wounded by a poisoned arrow, and the poison had seeped into his arm bone. Hua Tu was called and explained that he would need to cut the arm open and scrape the poison from the bone itself. He offered the general his mafeesin, but Guan Yu, the legend says, laughed. He refused the anesthetic. Instead, he called for a chessboard and a cup of wine, and as Hua, to cut his arm open to the bone, the general calmly played his game, showing no sign of pain. This story was meant to highlight Guan Yu's incredible toughness, but it also tells us something about mafeesin. It was a known, powerful tool, a tool that a lesser man would have certainly required. This surgical use was profoundly different from the general remedies described by Shenong. This was a specialized, high-stakes application of the plant's most powerful properties. And with Hua Tu's death, this advanced knowledge of surgery and the formula for his anesthetic was largely lost. Chinese medicine would, for the most part, turn away from the blade, focusing instead on herbalism, acupuncture, and balance. The story of mafeesin remains a tantalizing what-if in the history of medicine. While these medical uses were profound, they were a specialized niche. For the vast, overwhelming majority of Chinese society, for the farmer, the soldier, and the bureaucrat, the plant's other gift was far more important. We must now look at the other face of Ma. We must look at hemp. When we speak of hemp, we are referring to the common name for strains of cannabis sativa, that are grown specifically for industrial use. These plants are tall, fibrous stalks, containing almost none of the psychoactive compounds, less than 0.3%. This is the plant that was bred for its utility, not its ghosts. And in ancient China, this plant was the fiber of a nation. Its importance was absolute. When the 5 grains of China were listed, it was hemp seed, or woma, that was often named as one of them. The seeds were a critical food source, a dense kernel of protein and oil that sustained the common people. But its primary role was as a textile. Long before cotton was introduced to China, hemp was the dominant fiber. It was used to make clothing for everyone. We can feel the rough, coarse, yet incredibly durable texture of a common farmer's undyed hemp tunic. It was the fabric of labor, strong and long-lasting. It was also used for ritual. For centuries, traditional mourning garments, worn to honor the dead, were made from coarse, undyed hemp. It was, quite literally, the fabric of daily life, from the rice paddy to the funeral rite. It was used for ropes, for fishing nets, and for the heavy, taut bowstrings on a soldier's longbow. It was a strategic, foundational material. But hemp's single most critical contribution, the one that would truly change the world, was an invention that we are still using to this very day. This was the invention of paper. For centuries, records in China were kept on heavy bamboo slips or expensive, delicate silk. This was not efficient for a large, complex empire. Paper, of a very primitive kind, had existed, but in 105 CE, a Han Dynasty court official named Sis Lun is credited with perfecting the process. He was not, as is often said, the inventor. He was the standardizer, the man who perfected the recipe and the process, making it viable for mass production. And what was his recipe? He created a pulp from mulberry bark, remnants of cloth, and, crucially, hemp waste. This waste was old hemp rags, used clothing, and, most importantly, old hemp fishing nets. In a paper-making workshop, we would hear the rhythmic sound of a large wooden mallet pounding these wet fibers against a stone, breaking them down into a soggy, uniform pulp. This was an act of industrial recycling. This pulp was then mixed with water in a large vat. A papermaker would dip a large, flat screen, a fine mesh of bamboo into the vat. As they lifted the screen out, the water would drain away, leaving a thin, milky white sheet of new paper forming on its surface. The air would be thick with the smell of damp fibers and the slightly sour scent of the sizing agent used to make the paper less absorbent. Why hemp? The secret was the fiber itself. Hemp fibers are incredibly long and incredibly strong. This meant that the paper they produced was not brittle or weak. It was durable, high quality, and could last for centuries. In fact, the oldest surviving pieces of paper ever found are made from hemp. This invention, built on a base of hemp, revolutionized everything. It made possible the wide dissemination of literature and philosophy. It allowed for a complex, centralized bureaucracy to function on written records. It became the medium for art, culture, and governance. This technology, born in a Chinese workshop from discarded hemp fibers, would eventually spread along the Silk Road to the Middle East and then to Europe, where it would fuel the Renaissance. The simple, non-psychoactive stalk of the ma plant had given humanity one of its most powerful tools. This incredible utility, the fiber that could clothe a person and also record their thoughts, would become the plant's primary identity as it moved out of China. But as it moved south, along another, more ancient migration route, it found a new and deeply spiritual home. We leave the workshops and apothecaries of China and follow a different branch of the plant's great journey. This branch takes us south into the Indian subcontinent. It is thought that cannabis first arrived here with the Indo-Aryan migrations, the same steppe peoples who had moved west. Around 1500 BCE, they brought the plant from its Central Asian homeland into a new, vastly different climate. The cold, dry steppes gave way to the oppressive, humid heat of the Ganges River basin. And here, the plant's identity was transformed once again. Its new role was codified in the most ancient and sacred scriptures of Hinduism, the Vedas. The Vedas, composed in the ancient Sanskrit language, are the foundational texts of the religion. Specifically, in the fourth Veda, the Atharva Veda, composed around 1000 BCE, we find hymns, spells, and incantations. And in these hymns, we find a plant called banga. This is one of the earliest names for cannabis in India, and the Atharva Veda does not list it as a fiber or as a medicine for gout. It lists banga as one of the 5 sacred plants given to humanity. This is a profound distinction. The text contains a hymn that calls it a source of happiness, a liberator of sin, and a plant that is used to release us from anxiety. Here, the plant's primary role was spiritual. It was a sacred aid, a tool for the mind and the soul. There has been a long and deep scholarly debate about whether cannabis was, in fact, an ingredient in the legendary, mysterious, divine drink of the gods, soma. While that debate remains unresolved, the very fact that it is a serious candidate shows the incredibly high sacred status the plant held. In later Hindu mythology, this connection became even more direct and powerful. Cannabis became inextricably linked with one of the principal deities of the Hindu trinity, Lord Shiva, the destroyer, the transformer, and the god of ascetics. One legend tells that Shiva, after a great conflict with his family, went to the fields in distress. He cooled himself under a banga plant, and after eating some of its leaves, he felt so refreshed and soothed that he adopted it as his favorite food. From this, he gained the title, the Lord of Bang. In temples, we might see the visual of a small green cannabis leaf being offered to a statue of Shiva. This cemented the plant's role in India. It was not an industrial product. It was not a funeral rite. It was a sacred aid for meditation and religious ceremony. We can imagine a sadhu, a holy man with long, matted hair, his body covered in ritual ash, sitting by the holy river Ganges. His use of bhanga is not recreational. It is a part of his spiritual practice, a way to quiet the outside world and deepen his meditation, to feel a closer connection to his god, Shiva. The sound of a Brahmin priest chanting a hymn from the Atharva Veda would carry over the water, a tradition thousands of years old. The plant was, and still is, famously prepared as a drink. Bhang is a traditional preparation of cannabis, ground into a paste with milk, ghee, and sweet, warming spices like cardamom and ginger. Its milky, spicy, and sweet smell is associated with festivals and spiritual practice. It's remarkable how one plant can be seen in so many different lights. In the hands of the Scythians, a tool for ecstatic ritual. In China, a balanced medicine for the body and a foundational fiber for an empire. And in India, a sacred icon, a key to the divine. This ability to wear different masks, to be a tool, a medicine, and a sacred symbol, is a core part of its long and complex story. As we settle in, it's a good moment to just reflect. How does this ancient, multifaceted history change our perception of the plant's place in the world? There's no right answer, of course. It is just something to ponder as we drift. And as we ponder, our story now follows the plant's most practical form across the seas. Our story now follows the plant's most practical form, its fibrous stalk, as it moves west. We leave the spiritual highlands of India and the scholarly apothecaries of China, and we journey to the heart of the ancient Western world. The pace of our story slows now. We are entering a new phase, a time of reflection, focusing on the humble, practical, and utterly essential role this plant would play. We journey to the Roman Empire. Here, the plant's identity was, once again, completely transformed. The Romans, masters of engineering and logistics, were relatively late to adopt hemp. For much of their early history, they preferred the fine fibers of flax, which gave them linen. They likely learned of this new coarser plant from the peoples they conquered, and traded with the Dacians in the east and from the Greeks, who knew of it from their own Scythian neighbors. When the Romans finally embraced hemp, they did so not for ritual and not for medicine, but for industry. Their empire was, above all, a naval power. From the cold, choppy waters of the north, patrolled by the Classis Britannica or the British fleet, to the vast, central expanse of the Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, Rome's power was projected by its ships, and these fleets, thousands of vessels, from light, fast galleys to massive grain transports, had an insatiable, critical need for one thing: rope. Hemp fiber was ideal for this. In fact, it was perfect. It is incredibly strong, astoundingly durable, and, most importantly, it is highly resistant to the corrosive effects of saltwater rot. Flax and other fibers would weaken and decay, but hemp endured. We can imagine the great Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, a man driven by an endless curiosity about the world, walking the busy docks of Ostia, the port of Rome. The air is thick with the salty, briny smell of the sea, mixed with the sharp scent of pine tar and the unmistakable, earthy smell of hemp rope. In his monumental work, Natural History, written in the 1st century CE, he discusses this plant. He calls it cannabis, but his description contains none of the joy of the Scythian vapor baths, none of the ghosts that Shannon had warned of. To Pliny and to the Roman world he was documenting: This was a plant of pure, practical utility. He notes that it is grown for its strong fibers. He describes, with his trademark clarity, how it is processed. This process was not delicate. It was a heavy agricultural industry. First, the tall hemp stalks were harvested and submerged in water, in great retting ponds. Here, they were left to soak and partially rot. We can imagine the overpowering, funky, almost swampy smell of these ponds, where bacteria were patiently breaking down the pectin that held the fibers together. After weeks, the stalks were removed, dried, and then beaten by workers using wooden scutching knives. This created a rhythmic, percussive sound. The constant asterisk thwack, 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 asterisk of wood on stalk, separating the tough, woody core from the prize. The prize was the long, pale fiber itself, a raw, scratchy bundle called tow. This tow was the raw material for the restians, the Roman rope makers. These men belonged to a critical guild, as essential to the military as any soldier. They would take these bundles and spin them into yarn, and then twist the yarns into strands, and the strands into ropes. On the docks, you would see the result of their labor. Massive, coiled anchor cables, some as thick as a man's arm, lay ready to be loaded onto a warship. Archaeology confirms this. The wreck of a Roman ship, the Kamachio which sank in the 1st century BCE, was discovered with its rigging and anchor cables still partially intact. They were made of hemp, and it was not just the ropes. While many fine sails were still made of lighter linen, the heavy-duty sails, especially for the large, round-hulled merchant ships known as corbita, were often made of hemp canvas. This thick, durable sailcloth could withstand the rigors of a long journey, carrying grain from Egypt to Rome. Beyond the navy, the Roman military found other uses for this unmatched fiber. It was spun into immensely strong bowstrings, it was woven into heavy-duty nets, and it was twisted into the massive torsion ropes that powered the Roman catapults, the artillery of the ancient world. What is most notable in all the writings of Roman authors like Pliny or the agricultural writer Columella is what they do not say. They discuss hemp purely as an agricultural and industrial crop. The plant's other identity, its psychoactive power, so well known to the Scythians just a few centuries before, seems to have been completely lost. The strains the Romans grew were likely pure industrial hemp, and the memory of its other use had faded from the Western world, replaced by the practical demands of an empire built on logistics. The fall of Rome in the West did little to stop the spread of this vital fiber. In the centuries that followed, as the world knit itself back together, hemp's importance would only grow. It became, quite literally, the engine of a new era of exploration. We now drift forward in time into the age of sail, which began in the 1400s. The pace of our story slows, becoming as steady as the ocean breeze. For the next 400 years, from the first voyages of discovery to the great naval battles of the Napoleonic era, hemp was an indispensable strategic resource. It was as vital to a navy as the wood for its hulls or the iron for its cannons. Nations would rise and fall on their access to it. Monarchs and admirals obsessed over its supply, and wars were sometimes fought to control the trade routes that carried it. The finest, strongest, and most prized hemp fiber in the world came from Russia. Its long, tough fibers were a primary export, and the wealth of nations depended on this trade. In the shipyards of England, Spain, France, and Holland. This hemp was transformed into cordage. This is the all-encompassing term for the vast, complex system of ropes, lines, and cables required to operate a sailing ship. The scale of this industry is almost impossible to imagine. A single large warship, like the famous HMS Victory Admiral Nelson's flagship, required over 100 tons of hemp to fully rig it. Let us try, for a moment, to picture what that truly means. 100 tons. It is miles upon miles of rope. It is the massive anchor cables, so thick and heavy that dozens of men were needed to haul them. It is the standing rigging, the thick, tarred shrouds and stays. These were the ropes that held the colossal masts in place, a spider's web of immense strength, bracing the masts against the constant, powerful force of the wind. We can feel the texture of one of these shrouds under our hand, rough, sticky with tar, and as solid as a tree branch. Then there was the running rigging. This was the even more complex system of lines and pulleys used to control the sails. Every sail had multiple ropes to raise it, lower it, and trim its angle to the wind. On a tall ship, this system was a web of thousands of lines, and the air was filled with the sound of the wind, singing, and whistling, as it passed through this intricate hempen net. The creaking and groaning of the masts was the sound of the wood straining against the hemp, all of it working together to move the ship. And then there were the sails themselves. The very word canvas, the name for that heavy, durable sailcloth, is directly derived from the word cannabis. It comes to us from the Latin cannapacious which simply means made of hemp. Hemp's utility did not even end there. A ship was made of thousands of wooden planks, and every seam between them was a potential leak. To make the holes watertight, workers would take old, frayed hemp rope, untwist it into a substance called oakum, soak it in hot tar, and then use hammers and chisels to caulk it, driving it deep into the seams. The overwhelming, sharp, and medicinal smell of tar was the smell of the shipyards, the scent of preserving both the wood and the hemp that held it all together. This resource was so critical that nations took extraordinary measures to secure it. In 1535, King Henry VIII of England, desperate to build a navy, ordered all landowners to sow 1/4 of an acre of hemp for every 60 acres they owned. This was not a request. It was a royal mandate. This mandate was carried directly to the New World. In the American colonies, growing hemp was a duty. In Virginia, the colonists at Jamestown were, for a time, required by law to grow it. This fiber was the lifeblood of the empire. To create the ropes themselves, a special, massive building was required. This was the rope walk, or the ropery. We can imagine stepping into one. It is a building unlike any other, impossibly long and thin, sometimes over 1,000 feet in length. The air inside is dim and hazy with fine fiber dust, and down the entire length of the building, workers are walking, but they are walking backward. They have bundles of hemp fiber tied around their waists, and as they walk backward, they are spinning the fiber onto a hook, which is turned by a wheel at one end. They walk and spin, their movements rhythmic, hypnotic, turning the tow into yarn. Then the yarns are walked and twisted into strands, and the strands into the final massive rope. It was a slow, methodical, almost meditative process that created the sinews of a global sailing network. This humble fiber, born on the steppes, had conquered the seas, but it was also, at the exact same time, conquering the world of ideas, thanks to an invention from its distant past in China. We now turn to the other great pillar of hemp's industrial reign, paper. The story is just as profound, though perhaps even quieter. As we learned the secret of paper making, using a pulp of mulberry and hemp fibers, was perfected by Kaiserly Lun in China around 105 CE for centuries. This was a closely guarded secret, but secrets, like seeds, have a way of traveling. The technology moved slowly west along the Great Silk Road, a journey of 1,000 miles and 1,000 years. The key moment of its transfer happened at the Battle of Talas in the year 751 CE. Here, on the border of modern-day Kyrgyzstan, the armies of the Arab Abbasid Caliphate defeated the Chinese Tang dynasty. Among the prisoners of war they captured were Chinese papermakers. The Arab world, a culture of scholarship and science, immediately recognized the power of this invention. They established their own paper mills, and the technology spread rapidly through the Islamic world, from Samarkand to Baghdad. From there, it entered Europe. The Moors, the Arab rulers of Spain, brought papermaking with them in the 12th century. In Italy, the first great paper mill was established in the town of Fabriano in 1264. But this new European paper was different. It was not made from raw virgin hemp stalks. It was made from rags. In the Middle Ages, the two primary textile fibers for clothing were linen from flax and hemp. The European paper mills built their industry on recycling. They collected old, discarded clothing, old ropes, and old textiles. This created a new, humble, and essential profession, the rag picker. This was a low-status job, a person who walked the streets and sifted through refuse, collecting old, dirty textiles to sell to the paper mills. We can imagine them, a silent, overlooked figure, gathering the raw materials for a revolution. At the mills, these hemp and linen rags were sorted, cleaned, and then placed in a vat to be boiled and beaten into a gray, lumpy pulp. This was the same process as in China, but with a new ingredient. This rag paper was tough, flexible, and wonderfully durable. Then, around the year 1440, in Mainz, Germany, a man named Johannes Gutenberg perfected his invention of the movable type printing press. He had the machine, he had the ink, but he needed a substrate. Vellum, or animal skin, was the traditional material for important books, but it was astronomically expensive and slow to produce. A single Bible on vellum required the skins of over 100 animals. It was not a material for mass production. Hemp and linen rag paper was the perfect medium. It was cheap to produce from recycled materials. It was strong enough to withstand the mechanical pressure of the press, and its slightly fibrous texture absorbed the new oil-based inks beautifully. When Gutenberg printed his famous Bible in the 1450s, many of the surviving copies were printed on this high-quality rag paper. We can still see and feel it today. We can smell the musty, slightly sweet scent of an old book, its pages thick and soft. This is the scent of recycled hemp and linen. The printing press, fueled by this paper, changed the world. It fueled the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. This entire explosion of knowledge, the very ideas that built our modern world, was printed on paper made from the discarded shirts and ropes of the old one. We can imagine the quiet, studious atmosphere of a medieval scriptorium where a monk would take months to copy one book by hand, now being replaced by the new mechanical sounds of the printing press. The asterisk, clack asterisk of the metal type, the slow asterisk, groan asterisk of the wooden screw and the steady shush of the ink roller. This one plant, in its non-psychoactive hemp form, had provided the ropes to discover the new world, and the paper to record that discovery. Before we move on, we must reflect on just how universal this fiber truly was. We will now paint a final picture of this hempen world, the world as it existed just before the great disruptions of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. Before this time, hemp was simply the default. It was the ubiquitous, humble, and essential material of daily life. It was the go-to fiber for any task that required strength and durability. Imagine a farmer's life. They might wake on a mattress covered in coarse hemp ticking. They might pull on a rough, scratchy hemp fiber shirt, a garment that would only become soft after 100 washes. In the farmhouse, heavy hemp curtains would be drawn against the cold. When the farmer went to the field, their plow harness and the tethers for their animals would be made of hemp. The rope for their well was hemp. The grain they harvested, the flour it was ground into, and the potatoes they dug from the earth were all transported and stored in hemp sacks. We can still imagine the earthy, dusty smell of one of these rough-spun bags. In the wider world, this was the standard. The iconic Conestoga wagons, the prairie schooners that settled the American West, had their famous white canvas covers made of sturdy, water-resistant hemp. Even the first pairs of Levi's jeans, made for the miners of the California Gold Rush, were not made of blue denim, but of a tough, brown canvas, rumored to be hemp. The name canvas itself tells the story. We can see this world in the paintings of the Dutch masters. In their grand maritime scenes, we see sailors, tiny figures in the rigging, mending a thick, pale brown hemp sail. It is a world bound together by this fiber. Then, in a very short span of time, this world vanished. It was not one thing, but several, that ended hemp's long reign. First, in 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. This machine made processing the short fibers of cotton vastly cheaper and faster. Cotton, which was softer and easier to spin and dye, flooded the market, replacing hemp in clothing. Other fibers, like jute from Asia, became the new material for burlap sacks. Sisal replaced hemp for baling twine. And on the seas, the greatest change of all, the rise of the steamship in the mid-19th century. These new, powerful ships, their hulls made of iron, did not have sails. They did not need the 100 tons of hemp rigging. The navies of the world, for centuries the greatest customers for hemp, simply stopped buying it. And so, the age of hemp drew to a quiet close. Its journey, which began on the windy steppes and crossed every ocean, had reached a destination. The fiber that had rigged empires and printed revolutions gently faded into the background, replaced by new technologies. Our main story of this practical, globe-trotting plant concludes here. It's a journey that reminds us how even the most humble things can shape our world in profound ways. I hope this part of our story has been a relaxing companion for you. As we continue, our journey becomes even quieter, drifting into the lost worlds of medicine and spirit. I hope you're feeling comfortable and perhaps just a little bit sleepy. Our story now drifts away from the great industrial story of hemp. That journey of ropes and sails and paper has found its quiet conclusion. And so, we find ourselves with time to spare, time to float back, to revisit a lost thread, a different path that the plant once walked. The pace of our story becomes slower now, quieter. We are drifting back in time, back to the ancient world, to explore the plant's other, forgotten identity. We are settling into the hushed and fragrant halls of the ancient apothecary, to learn of the plant's long history as a medicine. Our journey begins not with the Scythian warriors, but with the men who came after, the ones who studied their world with a quiet, scholarly precision. We travel to the 1st century CE, to the world of the Roman Empire, a world that was, by then, deeply influenced by Greek thought. Here we meet a man named Dioscorides. He was a Greek physician, a botanist, and a surgeon, born in what is now modern-day Turkey. He was, like many of the best physicians of his day, a doctor in the Roman army. This was, perhaps, the best education a botanist could receive. As the legions moved, he moved with them, traveling across the vast expanse of the empire. He saw the plants of Gaul, of North Africa, of the Near East, and everywhere he went, he observed, he collected, he sketched, and he wrote. We can imagine him, after a long march, sitting by a campfire, or in a quiet valetudinarium, a Roman military hospital. We can see him carefully drawing a cannabis plant in his notebook, noting the shape of its leaves, the texture of its stalk. From this lifetime of meticulous observation, he compiled his masterpiece. It was a 5-volume encyclopedia of herbal medicine called De Materia Medica, or On Medical Materials. This was not just *A* book. It was THE book. For over 1,500 years, Dioscorides' encyclopedia was the single most important, most referenced, and most trusted pharmacopoeia in the entire Western world. It was the absolute standard. And so, we look inside this foundational text. There, we find an entry for cannabis. He begins by distinguishing between 2 different types. He notes a wild and a cultivated variety, or perhaps what he saw as female and male plants. He was, in his own way, observing the same duality that the ancient Chinese had, the difference between the wild, resinous plant and the tall, fibrous one. But his focus was purely medical. He notes that the seed, which, for ancient writers, often meant the whole flowering head, had powerful properties. He writes that it quenches inflammations. He describes how it is used to make poultices. We can almost smell this ancient remedy. A pharmacist's apprentice, using a heavy mortar and pestle, would crush the hemp seeds. We can hear the steady, rhythmic thump and grind of the stone. This paste would be mixed with herbs and warm water, steaming slightly, then spread on a clean linen cloth. This poultice, Dioscorides writes, was laid on swellings, and, most notably, was used to treat gout, a painful inflammation of the joints. This was not its only use. He also recommends a juice, likely pressed from the fresh, green plant, as a remedy for earaches. He suggests that a few drops of this green juice could clear blockages and soothe the pain. We can picture the scene, the quiet, orderly room of a Roman hospital, with its clean marble floors, smelling of dried herbs and linen. A physician, having read his Dioscorides, would calmly administer this simple, plant-based remedy. But like the Chinese physicians, Dioscorides was a keen observer. He did not just list benefits. He also included a warning. He notes that the seed, if eaten of much, doth take away generation. This suggests he, or the healers he learned from, knew that the plant was powerful. They had observed that in large doses it had profound systemic effects on the body. This was not a simple food. It was a potent medicine to be handled with knowledge. He was not the only one to write of it. A little later, in the 2nd century CE, lived Galen of Pergamon. Galen was, without question, the most famous and influential physician of the entire Roman Empire. His theories on medicine and the four humors would dominate Western thought for more than a millennium, and Galen too mentions *KNNA bis *, but he mentions it in a different and very fascinating context. Galen notes that the plant was sometimes served as a tragamata, a kind of dessert or treat at wealthy feasts. He wrote that it was served to promote hilarity and happiness. This small note is incredibly revealing. It shows that the educated, elite Romans did know of the plant's psychoactive properties, but their understanding was a world away from the ecstatic shamanic rituals of the Scythians. For the Romans, the plant had been neatly sorted into 3 distinct boxes. First, and most important, was its industrial use as hemp, the fiber for the ropes that held their empire together. Second, as we see in Dioscorides, it was a serious, if humble, medicine, a useful tool in the apothecary, kept in small clay pots labeled in Greek *KNNA vis*. And third, as Galen notes, it was a social novelty, an exotic dessert to make guests laugh at a party. This dual understanding, this separation of the practical, the medical, and the recreational, shows a complex relationship with the plant, but the medical knowledge, so carefully catalogued, was now set in stone. And this medical knowledge, recorded by the Greeks and practiced by the Romans, was not lost. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the great libraries of Europe faded. But the torch of knowledge, that heavy, precious book by Dioscorides, was not extinguished. It was picked up, saved, and carried to the great new centers of learning in the glittering cities of the Islamic Golden Age. We drift now, across the centuries, to the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. While much of Europe was in a period of fragmentation, a new civilization, centered in Baghdad, in Cairo, and in Cordoba, was undergoing a scientific and cultural explosion. The new capitals of the Islamic world built vast libraries, like the legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And their first great project was translation. Scholars, working in Arabic, Syriac, and Greek, sought out and translated all the great works of the classical world. They translated the philosophy of Aristotle, the mathematics of Euclid, and, crucially, the medical texts of Galen and Dioscorides. They did not just save this knowledge, they revered it, studied it, and then they built upon it. We can imagine the atmosphere in the House of Wisdom. It is not the sound of chanting in a stone monastery. It is the quiet, busy sound of paper pages turning, a technology that had, itself, arrived from China. It is the sound of scholars of all faiths, debating, writing, and pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Among these great minds, one stands out, Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna. He was a Persian polymath, a philosopher, astronomer, and physician of staggering genius. Around the year 980, he began his great work, the Canon of Medicine. This was not just a translation, it was a complete, systematic reorganization and expansion of all known medical knowledge, from the Greeks to his own new observations. For the next 600 years, Avicenna's Canon would become the standard medical textbook, replacing even Dioscorides in the universities of both the Islamic world and, eventually, Europe. And, of course, Avicenna includes an entry for cannabis, which he knew by its Arabic Persian name, *Kanab*. His description is one of clinical precision. He describes it as a detergent, meaning it was used for cleansing, perhaps in washes for the skin. He called it a resolvent. This is a fascinating term. It meant it was used to dissolve or resolve things, specifically hard swellings or even tumors. This is a clear echo of Dioscorides' use for swellings. Avicenna also describes it as a powerful analgesic, a word we still use today. He notes that it is highly effective for gout, for joint pain, and for edema, or the swelling of tissues. This anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving property is the most consistent thread in the plant's entire medical history, and, in a direct, unbroken line of knowledge from Dioscorides, Avicenna also recommends cannab in the form of juice or drops as an excellent remedy for earaches and infections. The great hospitals of this era, the *BIMISTAN* of were wonders of the world. They had separate wards for different illnesses, running water, and vast, extensive apothecaries. We can picture a physician, his study filled with the scent of exotic spices, herbs, and paper scrolls, writing in elegant Arabic script, detailing the properties of *QUN*NAB*. In that hospital's pharmacy, this plant would have been stocked and used daily for its analgesic and anti-inflammatory properties. And just as the Romans had a separate category for its other effects, the Arabic world also knew of hashish. The potent psychoactive resin of the plant, was well known by this time. It was the subject of stories and often of moral debate, but it was generally treated as a social substance, quite separate from the *cannab used by physicians. Some scholars have even suggested that the advanced surgeons of the Islamic Golden Age, who were far ahead of their European contemporaries, may have used cannabis in their anesthetic formulas. It is possible they mixed it with other powerful substances, like opium, to render patients unconscious during surgery. This would be, in a way, an independent rediscovery of the lost secret of Hua to the divine doctor of Han Dynasty China. It is a quiet, tantalizing thought. In the workshops of the alchemists, we might hear the quiet, bubbling sound of an alembic, the revolutionary new apparatus for distillation. They were using it to create purer extracts, essential oils, and new medicines. This was not folk healing. This was a new, systematic science, built on the foundations of the past. And this rich, detailed, and expanded medical tradition, carried from Greece to Persia, translated into Arabic, and tested in the world's most advanced hospitals, would eventually find its way back to Europe. It was time for this knowledge to complete its long, slow circle. The journey back was slow, beginning around the 12th century. It came primarily through two doors. The first was Moorish Spain, where Arab, Jewish, and Christian scholars worked side by side in cities like Toledo, translating the great Arabic texts ** into Latin. The second was the new medical school in Salerno, Italy, which had strong connections to the medical knowledge of the East. And so, Avicenna's *canon*, and the newly rediscovered works of Dioscorides began to circulate in a Europe that was, itself, reawakening intellectually. The first keepers of this knowledge were, as they had been for centuries, the monks, in the quiet, walled gardens of monasteries. Monks were the primary caregivers, scholars, and pharmacists of the early Middle Ages. They cultivated what were known as physic gardens, plots filled with medicinal herbs. We can imagine the scene, the smell of damp earth and green plants after a light rain, the only sound, the quiet plain-song chant echoing from the stone chapel. It is here that we meet another brilliant, remarkable figure, Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard was a German abbess, a mystic, a composer, and a writer on medicine and natural history in the 12th century. She was a woman of incredible authority and intellect. In her great book on natural medicine, called Physica, she writes about cannabis. Her description comes from two streams of knowledge. One was the new, learned tradition coming from the texts. The other was the simple, practical, folk knowledge of the German people. She wrote that the plant was warm in its nature, which placed it within the complex humoral system of Galen. She noted that its seed is healthy for human beings to eat. It is easily digested, a nutritional observation that echoes the ancient Chinese. But her most famous contribution was for headaches. She wrote that the plant lessens the bad humors that cause pain, and that whoever has a headache may eat of it. We can picture a quiet scene in the monastery's infirmary, a room filled with focused, gentle energy. A monk, having consulted Hildegard's work, gently applies a warm poultice made from the common hemp plant growing in the garden to an old man's swollen, aching hand. This knowledge was not limited to the monasteries. It was, after all, a common plant. Hemp was being grown, everywhere, for fiber, for ropes, for shirts. Its very commonness made it a perfect, cheap, and readily available ingredient for folk healers. By the time of the Renaissance, printed herbals, like the Great Herbal of 1526, included hemp as a standard entry. These books, written for the common person, recorded the folk uses. They noted it was used in poultices for shrunk sinews, what we would call arthritis, and that the root, when boiled, could allay the pain of the joints. This long, quiet medical tradition, stretching in an unbroken line from China and Greece, carried by the great Persian scholars, and preserved in the monasteries of Europe, would continue peacefully for centuries. It culminated in the work of one of Europe's most famous and most rebellious herbalists. Our medical journey ends, for now, in 17th century England. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, horses, and the dampness of a busy London street. Here we find Nicholas Culpeper. He was a botanist, an herbalist, and a physician who lived in a time of great upheaval during the English Civil War, and he was a rebel. He was furious with the medical establishment, the wealthy College of Physicians, who kept all their medical knowledge locked away in Latin, inaccessible to the common person. Culpeper believed that medicine was a right, not a privilege, so he did something revolutionary, and to the doctors, infuriating. He translated the official Latin pharmacopoeia into English. He wrote his own comprehensive herbal, the English Physician, or, as it's known, Culpeper's Complete Herbal, and he had it printed not as a beautiful, expensive manuscript, but on cheap presses, creating small, leather-bound books that anyone could afford. We can hear the asterisk, clack, asterisk, and asterisk grown asterisk of these presses, running off cheap copies, spreading this knowledge to the people. Culpeper's herbal is a fascinating blend of science and tradition. He was a believer in astrological botany, the common belief that every plant was governed by a planet. He looked at the hemp plant, tough, fibrous, ancient, and associated with pain and burdens, and he linked it to the planet Saturn. To him, this made perfect sense. Saturn was the planet of old age, of structure, of chronic conditions, and of burdens. A plant ruled by Saturn would, therefore be a perfect remedy for the chronic, burdensome pains of the joints. When we read his entry for hemp, we are reading a summary of the past 1,500 years. He summarizes centuries of knowledge. He notes that the seed, or an emulsion of it, is good for coughs. He states that it is excellent for allaying inflammations. He mentions it is used for the king's evil, which was scrofula, a painful swelling of the lymph nodes in the neck. He then repeats the most consistent fact of all. He writes that the boiled root, or a decoction of it, allays inflammations in the joints, and is good for gout and pains in the hips. And then, in a truly remarkable moment, we find this line. He notes that the juice dropped into the ears kills worms in them. This is the exact same specific remedy that Dioscorides had recorded in his Roman army tent 1,500 years earlier. The idea had been passed down unchanged from Roman Greece to Avicenna's Persia to Hildegard's Germany and now to Culpeper's London. Culpeper's work represents the peak and also the end of this long, traditional herbal knowledge. Soon after his time, the world would begin to change. The rise of scientific chemistry, of new synthetic drugs, and a new model of medicine would begin. And in this new world, the ancient, humble hemp plant, this simple remedy from the field, would be set aside. It would be almost completely forgotten by Western medicine. And with that, the medical story of cannabis largely dissolves. For centuries, it was a trusted, if humble, part of the apothecary's cabinet, a soother of joints, a quieter of coughs, a simple remedy grown in the fields. But as new medicines arose, this ancient knowledge, passed down from Greece to Persia to the monasteries of Europe, was set aside. It's a gentle reminder of how knowledge can be lost and then found again. As we drift even deeper, we leave the world of the physical and enter the world of the spirit. We have come to the end of our journey through the physical world. We have left the quiet, herbal-scented rooms of the ancient apothecary, where the plant was a healer, a soother of pain. That story of poultices and decoctions has faded like the ink in a forgotten herbal. And now, as our story draws to its final, gentle close, we find ourselves drifting on one last, slow current. The pace is the calmest it has been. The world around us is soft and quiet. We are floating now, away from the world of the practical, the industrial, and even the medical. We are drifting into the world of the ethereal. We are here to explore the plant's most mysterious and perhaps most ancient identity. Its role as a sacred plant, a key to the divine, a bridge to the world of the spirit. Our journey begins on the high, clear desert plateau of ancient Iran. We are in the land of Persia, in a time long before the rise of Rome, even before the height of Athens. We are in the world of one of humanity's oldest monotheistic religions, Zoroastrianism. This was the faith founded by the prophet Zoroaster, a religion built on the dualism of light and darkness, of truth and lies, and on the worship of a single, wise creator. The central element of Zoroastrian worship is fire. We can imagine a dark, quiet temple open to the air. In the center, a sacred fire crackles, its flames the only light, a symbol of purity and the divine presence. The air is thick with the scent of sacred incense, the smell of frankincense and rich sandalwood offered to the flames, and mixed with it another, sweet and herbal scent, the scent of a plant the priests called banga. This word, *, bhanga asterisk, is a direct relative of the Sanskrit word we heard in India. It points to a deep, shared, ancient root, a memory from the Central Asian steppe where these peoples began. In the Avesta, the primary collection of sacred Zoroastrian texts, this plant is mentioned with deep reverence. It is not just a plant, it is a sacred gift. The Zendavesta, a later commentary on the texts, refers to it as Zoroaster's good narcotic. It speaks of its kindly strength. This was not a plant used by all. Its use was ritual, and it was sacred, reserved for the priestly class, the magi. These were the wise men, the astronomers, the healers, and the keepers of the sacred rites. We can imagine them dressed in white robes, their faces covered, chanting softly from the Avesta as they tended the holy fire. And it was they who knew how to prepare the sacred drink. This drink, also called bhanga or perhaps mixed with the mysterious homa was a key to the spiritual realm. It was a sacrament consumed by priests in a state of ritual purity to help them achieve a state of religious ecstasy, to gain insight, or to communicate with the divine. The texts, in their poetic, ethereal way, speak of two kinds of bhanga. There was the terrestrial bhanga, the physical, green plant that grew from the earth, and then there was the heavenly bhanga, the divine spirit of the plant, the force that it unlocked. There is a famous story, a kind of vision quest, told of King Vishtaspa. He was the patron of Zoroaster himself, the king who first adopted the new faith. The story tells that to truly understand the greatness of the divine, the king was given a single potent draught of the sacred bhanga. It was prepared by the priests. We can imagine the taste, bitter, potent, and green. As he drank it, his body fell into a deep sleep, but his soul, the story says, was unbound. His soul traveled from the earth up through the heavens. He was allowed to witness the divine order of the cosmos, to see the glory of the Creator, and to understand the profound truth of Zoroaster's message. When he awoke, he was a changed man, his faith unshakable. This story, whether history or parable, tells us everything we need to know about the plant's role. It was a vehicle. It was a doorway, allowing the soul to travel, just for a moment, to a world beyond this one. And it was not just spiritual. The magi, who were also the healers, understood its other properties. They used it medically, as an antiseptic, and as a powerful anesthetic, perhaps carrying on a tradition that had started farther east. But its primary role was one of holy vision. It was a sacred tool handled with reverence, a good narcotic that revealed the heavens. We can see them still, the priests in the fire temple, the clear desert stars shining above, the crackling fire illuminating their white robes. As the mixed scent of sandalwood and bhanga rises to the sky, this sacred identity, born in the high plains near the plant's heartland, this idea of the plant as a divine key was perhaps strongest and most enduring in its adopted home. In India, we drift back now to a place we have visited before, but we see it differently. We are not in the apothecary or looking at the ancient texts of the Vedas. We are on the banks of the sacred river, Ganges. The pace of our thoughts slows. We can hear the sound of the great river flowing slowly, endlessly, on its journey to the sea. In the distance, the gentle, hypnotic sound of temple bells ringing in the warm air. Here, in the holy cities that line this river, we find the sad hisk, We have spoken of them before, but now we can truly see them. These are the asterisk, Baba's asterisk, the wandering holy men of Hinduism. They are ascetics, men who have renounced the world. They have given up all possessions, all family ties, all worldly comforts, in the pursuit of asterisk, moksha, asterisk, the final liberation of the soul. Many of these sadhis, with their long, matted hair, their bodies covered in sacred ash, are Shivits. They are the devotees of Lord Shiva, and as we know, they consider cannabis, or asterisk, bhang, asterisk, to be the sacred gift of Shiva himself, the Lord of Bang. Here we see a spiritual use that is not lost to history. It is not a ritual we must piece together from ancient texts. It is a living, breathing, uninterrupted tradition. We can see a sadhu sitting in the perfect stillness of the lotus position, his eyes closed, in deep meditation. Beside him, he may have a small, conical clay pipe. This is the asterisk, chillum asterisk. This is not recreation. This is, for him, a sacred tool, a central part of his religious practice. He will fill the asterisk, chillum asterisk, with asterisk, keras, asterisk, the potent resin of the plant. It is a call to Shiva, an offering. The purpose, as the sad hiss will explain, is to aid in meditation. It is a tool to quiet the endless noise of the outside world, to turn the focus inward, and to achieve a state of heightened spiritual awareness, a closer connection to their God. This is a practice of profound devotion, as ancient as the river itself. And it is not only these ascetics who use the plant in sacred practice. We spoke of the festival of Holi. This is the vibrant, joyful spring festival of colors. It is a time of chaos and celebration, of music and laughter. And it is also a time when asterisk, bhang, asterisk, is traditionally and joyfully consumed by the general population. It is often prepared as a drink, a asterisk banglassi asterisk, or a asterisk thandai asterisk, a sweet, milky, spicy concoction. This, too, is a sacred offering, a way for all people, not just the holy men, to partake in Shiva's gift, to feel a sense of communal joy and spiritual release. This deep spiritual connection to the plant is a thread that runs through the entire region. It is found not just in Hinduism. Certain mystical orders of Sikhs, like the Nahang warriors, have a tradition of using it. And some Sufi mystics, the mystical branch of Islam, also adopted it as an aid to their own ecstatic poetry and meditation. Unlike the lost vapor baths of the Scythians, or the half-forgotten rituals of the Magi, this spiritual practice continues. It is a quiet, ancient stream, flowing just beneath the surface of the modern world, a living testament to the plant's long spiritual history. This deep spiritual connection, this thread of reverence, was not limited to the East. It is a thread that is, perhaps, woven into more of our shared history than we ever realized. We drift now, leaving the warm, humid air of the Ganges, and float westward. We are drawn across the continents to the dry, dusty air of the Middle East. We are in the Holy Land. Our destination is an archaeological site called Tel Arad. This was an ancient walled fortress in the Kingdom of Judah, at the southern edge of the Negev desert. It is a place of dry, baked earth, a fortress that stood guard on the border of the kingdom around the year 750 BCE. Inside this fortress, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery. They found a small, preserved shrine. It was a perfect, miniature temple. It contained a holy of holies, the most sacred inner room. And at the entrance to this sacred space, they found two small, white limestone altars. One was slightly larger than the other. For decades, these altars were a quiet curiosity. On the top surface of both, there was a dark, solidified, blackened organic residue. It was clear that something had been burned on them as incense, but no one knew what. Then, in a groundbreaking 2020 study, scientists were finally able to analyze this ancient, mysterious residue. What they found was astonishing. It was a revelation that sent a quiet ripple through the world of history. The large altar, the analysis showed, contained the residue of frankincense. This was no surprise. Frankincense is a well-known, sweet, piney resin. It is mentioned throughout the biblical texts as a sacred incense, a worthy offering to God. This finding made perfect, logical sense, but it was the small altar that held the secret. When the scientists analyzed the dark residue from the second altar, they found something else entirely. They found the unmistakable chemical signatures of cannabinoids. They found THC. They found CBD. They found CBN. The study concluded, with high confidence, that this was the residue of cannabis, resin, or hashish. It had been mixed with animal fat to help it burn slowly as a thick, oily incense on the hot stones of the altar. This was the first time in history that direct, physical, scientific evidence of cannabis use had been found in a ritual setting in the ancient kingdom of Judah. Let us just pause and reflect on what this means. We are in that small, windowless shrine. It is a dim, silent, and deeply reverent space. A room perhaps meant for only one or two priests to enter. The dry, desert air is still, and on these two altars, two kinds of incense are burning. From the large altar, the air is filled with the sweet, familiar, holy scent of frankincense. And from the small altar, another aroma rises, pungent, herbal, and deeply psychoactive. The researchers who published the study concluded that the cannabis was not burned for its smell. It was intentionally burned for its mind-altering properties, as part of a ritual, most likely to stimulate ecstasy or a state of divine communion for the priests who stood in that holy place. From the shouts of joy in the Scythian tents, to the visions of the Persian magi, to the deep meditation of the sadhus, and now, here, as a holy incense in a Judahite fortress, this plant, in so many cultures and in so many forms, has been a helper, a tool for touching the divine. And so, our long story, our great quiet journey, comes to its end. We have followed this one humble plant from its very birthplace. We have seen it as a forgotten ally, a silent partner in the human story. We have seen its many faces, its many identities, a thread that has frayed into 1,000 different uses. We can reflect, just for a moment, on this plant of dualities. We remember its first face, hemp, the practical, earthy builder. We remember the rough, strong fiber that was twisted into the ropes that rigged the great ships of the age of sail. We can almost hear the wind in the HMS Victory rigging, the creak of the masts, all held in place by hemp. We remember the paper, the soft, durable rag paper that held the words of the Gutenberg Bible and the ideas of the Renaissance, the fiber that let us cross the world and then record what we found. We remember its humble face as food, the ma seed of ancient China, listed as one of the 5 sacred grains, a simple, nourishing source of protein and oil that sustained a civilization. We remember its kind face as a medicine, a soother of pain. We recall the legend of Hua too, and his lost anesthetic, Mufficin, *. We remember the careful drawings of Dioscorides, the Roman army doctor, prescribing it for gout and swellings. We recall the monasteries of the Middle Ages and Hildegard, who found it eased a headache. And we remember Nicholas Culpeper, who summarized 1,500 years of knowledge, recommending it for aching, swollen joints. And tonight, we have remembered its most ethereal face, the face of a ritual partner. We remember the Scythian warriors, huddled in their felt tents, shouting for joy as the vapor rose, a ritual of purification after loss. We remember the *BHANGA* of the Vedas, a source of happiness. We remember the sacred drink of Zoroaster's priests, the kindly strength that opened a door to the heavens. And we remember the living, breathing meditation of the sadhu by the Ganges, his *chilam*, a tool for finding stillness. This plant's history is not one of counterculture. Its history is the history of civilization. It is one of our oldest domesticated plants, one of our most versatile and most constant partners. And in our modern age, in the 20th century, a strange thing happened. All of these ancient, varied, and profound identities, the builder, the food, the healer, the spiritual guide, were all collapsed. They were flattened and forgotten. They were bundled into one single, controversial image. And the plant's long, rich, and quiet history was almost completely erased from our memory. It is a soothing thought, perhaps, to be reminded that our history is often far more complex, quieter, and deeper than the noisy present. The story of this plant is a gentle reminder that the world is old and that our relationship with the earth is written in these quiet, forgotten chapters. We are left with a final image, an image from before our story even began. We are back on the high, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia. The wind, the same wind that will one day power the sails of a hempen ship, rustles gently through its leaves. It is just a plant, a silent witness, waiting for the long human story that would soon unfold in so many threads all around it. Our journey tonight comes to a gentle close. We've traveled from the ancient steppes to the libraries of Persia, from the rope walks of the Age of Sail to the quiet temples of India. We've seen how one humble plant has been a partner to humanity in so many ways, as a builder, a healer, a spiritual guide, and a simple, everyday tool. Its story is a quiet thread woven through our entire history, and now that story is done, and it's time to rest. Thank you so much for joining me, your sleeping scribe, on this journey. It's a true privilege to share these stories with you. If you've enjoyed our time together, I hope you'll consider supporting the channel, or simply joining us again for our next story. For now, there is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about, but to let go. May your mind be calm, and may your sleep be deep, peaceful, and restorative. Good night.